He walked into the small-town diner, dressed like success itself, and walked out leaving a single bold zero. But that zero didn't measure her worth. It measured his. And before the sun set that afternoon, the richest man in town would discover how poor he had truly become. The bell above the diner door rang softly as he stepped inside, bringing with him the faint scent of expensive cologne and polished leather. Conversations faded almost instantly. Forks paused mid-air. Even the tired ceiling fan seemed to slow its rhythm. He did not belong here. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly against his broad shoulders. His shoes shined brighter than the diner's cracked tile floor. The watch around his wrist cost more than what most people inside probably earned in a year. Outside, through the dusty window, his luxury black car sat parked like a symbol of another world, one that rarely intersected with places like this. Behind the counter stood a young waitress in a slightly faded blue uniform and white apron. Her hair was pulled back neatly, though exhaustion lingered in the shadows beneath her eyes. Balanced carefully on her hip was her little boy, no older than 5, clinging to her shoulder as if the world beyond her arms felt unsafe. She noticed him immediately. Not because he was handsome, not because he was powerful, but because men like him rarely walked into places like this. She gently shifted her son to the stool behind the counter. "Sit here, sweetheart. Don't move, okay?" she whispered softly. He nodded, holding a small pencil and an old receipt paper like it was a treasure map. The millionaire scanned the room slowly. Worn wooden booths, cracked cream-colored tiles, coffee mugs stained by years of use. Tired faces trying to stretch small paychecks across long weeks. His eyes moved like an appraiser evaluating low-value assets. Then he chose the corner booth, the one slightly away from the rest, and sat down with deliberate slowness. He placed his phone and car keys neatly on the polished table, aligning them with careful precision. She approached him with a trained smile, the kind built from years of swallowing fatigue. "Good afternoon, sir. What can I get for you?" Her voice was respectful, steady. He barely looked at the menu. "I'll have your most expensive steak, add shrimp, and fresh juice. Whatever costs the most," he said it casually, almost carelessly. She wrote it down without hesitation. No reaction, no surprise, only professionalism. As she stepped away, she gently checked on her son, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead before rushing toward the kitchen window. The other customers whispered, "That's the businessman who just bought the old factory. He owns half the buildings downtown. What's he doing here?" He heard them, but he ignored them, because today wasn't about food. It was about something else. The meal arrived hot, plated beautifully despite the diner's humble surroundings. She placed it in front of him carefully, ensuring the steak was positioned perfectly, the shrimp aligned neatly. "Please let me know if you need anything," she said politely. And she meant it. The lunch rush grew heavier. Plates clattered. Orders were called. Coffee refilled endlessly. Yet she never once ignored his table. His glass never emptied. His plate never cooled. His napkin was replaced the moment it slipped. Between tasks, she glanced at her son, who sat quietly drawing circles and crooked shapes on receipt papers. Every few minutes she checked the door nervously, worried the manager might complain again about having him inside. He noticed everything. He saw how her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. He saw how she apologized softly when she passed too quickly near another table. He saw how she never allowed frustration to leak into her tone. And slowly, something inside him began forming. A silent test. For years, he had believed something simple. Money reveals character. Give someone a large tip, you see gratitude. Give someone nothing, you see their true nature. He cut into the steak thoughtfully. He had tested waiters before. Some rolled their eyes. Some muttered insults. Some chased him outside. He expected the same today, because in his mind, struggle often came with bitterness, and bitterness proved his superiority. When he finished eating, he leaned back slowly, dabbing his mouth with a crisp white napkin. She approached gently. "Was everything all right, sir?" "Yes," he said flatly. She handed him the leather folder with the bill inside. "Thank you for choosing us. I hope you have a peaceful afternoon." Peaceful. The word lingered strangely in his mind. He opened his wallet. Thick stacks of cash were visible, enough to make nearby tables glance discreetly. He pulled out exact change, not a dollar more. He placed it inside the folder and closed it carefully. Then, on the receipt line where tips usually appeared, he wrote a bold, deliberate 0. Not small, not accidental. Clear, intentional, final. He stood up without another word and walked toward the exit. The bell above the door rang again, and silence followed him out. She picked up the folder calmly, expecting nothing generous, but hoping maybe something small. Enough for groceries, enough for gas, enough to ease the tight calculations of the week. Her eyes moved down the receipt and froze. There it was, a large, unapologetic zero. For just a second, her chest tightened, not from anger, but from something older, familiar, that quiet sting of being measured and found unworthy. Around her, whispers grew louder. He left nothing? After ordering all that? Unbelievable. Her little boy looked up. Mom. She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced her posture straight. It's okay, baby, she whispered softly. Behind the counter, the manager watched with narrowed eyes, already preparing blame. Instead of breaking down, instead of running after him, instead of letting humiliation bloom in public, she folded the receipt carefully, took her son's small hand, and walked outside. The millionaire had not left yet. He stood beside his shining black car, pretending to check his phone, waiting, because the test wasn't finished. Not yet. And what she was about to say would rewrite everything he thought he knew about poverty. The afternoon sun hung low over the parking lot, casting long shadows across cracked asphalt and faded white lines. Heat shimmered above the hood of his luxury car. The world outside felt strangely quieter than it had moments ago inside the diner. He stood beside his car, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. But he wasn't reading anything. He was waiting. Waiting for anger. Waiting for accusation. Waiting for the explosion he believed always followed humiliation. The diner door opened behind him. He didn't turn immediately. He already knew. Soft footsteps approached across the pavement. Not rushed, not aggressive. Measured. He finally looked up. She stood a few steps away, her blue uniform slightly wrinkled from the long shift, white apron tied firmly at her waist. Her son stood beside her, one small hand gripping the edge of her apron as though it anchored him to safety. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't furious. She was calm. That unsettled him more than anything else could have. She held the receipt gently between her fingers, not crumpled, not waved in accusation, just held. Sir, she said quietly, her voice steady. Thank you again for coming in today. He blinked. That wasn't what he expected. She stepped a little closer, careful not to invade his space. You forgot to sign the customer copy, she continued politely. We need the signature for accounting. It protects the diner in case of discrepancies. No sarcasm, no bitterness, just responsibility. For a brief second, he frowned, confused by the absence of hostility. He took the receipt from her hand and glanced at it again. The bold zero stared back at him like a statement carved in ink. She waited patiently. Her son looked up at him with wide, curious eyes, not accusing, not judging, simply observing. He signed the receipt slowly. His pen felt heavier than usual. As he handed it back, he searched her face for something hidden. Resentment, maybe, or suppressed humiliation. But there was none. She accepted the paper and gave a small nod. Thank you, sir. She turned slightly, preparing to leave. Then she paused. Not dramatically. Not for attention. Just enough to say one more thing. Tips, she said gently, are blessings, not obligations. He felt something shift inside his chest. She met his eyes, not challenging him, not lowering her gaze either. And dignity, she continued softly, does not depend on someone else's generosity. The words were simple, but they landed with precision. He had faced boardrooms filled with aggressive investors. He had negotiated contracts worth millions. He had dominated conversations with confidence sharpened by wealth. Yet in that quiet parking lot, under the fading afternoon sun, he felt suddenly small. Not because she insulted him, not because she exposed him publicly, but because she didn't. There was no performance in her voice, no attempt to shame him in front of watching customers peering through the diner windows. She was protecting her job, protecting her son, protecting herself, without begging, without collapsing, without surrendering her pride. For years, he had believed money revealed character, but in that moment, he realized something far more unsettling. Character reveals money, and his had just been exposed. She turned fully this time, her son's hands still wrapped tightly around her apron, and began walking back toward the diner. Her steps were steady. No rush, no dramatic exit, just quiet strength. He watched them walk, mother and child, silhouettes against the golden light, and something long buried began to stir. A memory. A cramped apartment with peeling paint. A mother counting coins at a kitchen table. a tired woman wiping sweat from her brow after double shifts, pretending everything was fine. He remembered standing beside her as a child, watching strangers judge her for working late, for looking exhausted, for not smiling brightly enough. He remembered promising himself that when he became successful, he would never forget what struggle looked like from the inside. But somewhere along the path to wealth, he had forgotten. The zero he wrote no longer felt like a clever test. It felt like betrayal, not of her, of himself. He opened his car door, paused, closed it again. The leather interior suddenly felt suffocating. Air-conditioned comfort felt undeserved. Through the diner window, he could see her inside again, already serving another table. Her smile had been rebuilt, not fake, but practiced, as if humiliation were something she had learned to carry quietly. The manager leaned toward her, whispering sharply. Even from outside, he could sense the blame being placed on her shoulders. Her son sat back on the stool, pretending to draw again. But the boy's small body was stiff, listening, absorbing, learning how the world treats his mother. Guilt pressed against his ribs. This was no longer about a tip. It was about the lesson being taught to that child. He saw himself in the boy, the silent observer of injustice, storing it away, shaping future beliefs about power and worth. And suddenly, he understood the weight of what he had done. His experiment had consequences, not loud ones, not dramatic ones, quiet ones, the kind that shape hearts. He took a slow breath, not the confident inhale of a man entering a negotiation, but the uncertain breath of someone recognizing his own failure. For years, he had measured success in numbers, net worth, acquisitions, expansion. But what was the value of success that forgot empathy? What was the point of rising if it meant stepping on the memories that built him? He looked again at the diner, small, imperfect, surviving. Then at his reflection in the car window, polished, powerful, hollow. He had left a zero behind, but somehow he was the one who felt empty. His pride, once firm and unshakable, began to crumble quietly, not in humiliation, in realization. And realization is far heavier than shame, because it demands change. He straightened his jacket, closed the distance between his car and the diner door. This time, he wasn't walking in as a judge. He wasn't walking in to observe. He wasn't walking in to test. He was walking in as a man confronting himself. And he was no longer carrying a zero. He was carrying something else. Something that could not erase what he had done, but might begin to repair it. The bell above the diner door rang once more as he stepped back inside. Conversations softened again. Eyes followed him. But this time he did not feel superior. He felt exposed. She looked up from a nearby table, expecting another complaint. But the arrogance in his eyes was gone. In its place, something heavier, something honest. He walked toward the counter slowly, and placed a thick envelope beside the open receipt book. The room fell silent, and this time the silence did not belong to pride. It belonged to reckoning. The envelope landed softly on the counter, but the sound echoed through the entire diner. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups hovered inches from lips. Even the manager stepped forward, confused by the shift in energy. She looked down at the envelope, then up at him. Her expression wasn't hopeful. It wasn't suspicious. It was cautious. He didn't speak immediately. For a man used to commanding boardrooms with confident precision, words suddenly felt fragile. "I owe you something," he said finally. His voice had changed. It no longer carried authority. It carried reflection. She remained silent, waiting. "I once knew what it meant," he continued slowly, "to grow up watching a tired mother fight the world alone." Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter. He noticed. "I used to stand beside her," he said, glancing briefly at her son, "the same way your boy stands beside you." The little boy looked up, wide-eyed. The millionaire swallowed. "I promised myself that if I ever became successful, I would never forget what struggle looked like." His eyes dropped to the counter. But somewhere along the way, I did. The diner remained silent. No one moved. He tapped the envelope gently. "The zero I left," he admitted, "was written by pride." A pause. "This is written by memory." He stepped back slightly, giving her space. Slowly, carefully, she opened the envelope. Inside were thick stacks of cash, more than a generous tip, more than a kind gesture, enough to change breathing patterns, enough to quiet constant financial anxiety. Between the crisp bills was a folded note. Her hands trembled as she opened it, not from greed, from disbelief. The handwriting was steady, deliberate. It read, "I'm sorry for forgetting where I came from. I'm sorry for testing strength dressed in poverty. Success built walls around my heart. Your dignity broke them." Her vision blurred. Not because of the money, but because someone had finally seen her, not as a waitress, not as a struggling mother, but as a woman fighting silently, with grace. Her son tugged lightly at her apron. "Mom?" She knelt slightly beside him, pulling him close. "It's okay," she whispered, but this time her voice trembled. The manager, who had moments ago been prepared to criticize her, now stood awkwardly silent. Other customers lowered their eyes, some wiping them discreetly. The millionaire watched her carefully, not expecting praise, not expecting forgiveness, only hoping that this moment meant something more than money. She stood again and looked at him. Tears rested in her eyes, but they did not fall. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "I did," he replied. A long silence passed between them. Then she spoke words he did not expect. "Forgiveness," she said gently, "matters more than the money." The sentence landed deeper than anything else she had said that day. He nodded slowly, because he understood. This wasn't about generosity. It was about restoration, not of finances, of character. For years he had believed wealth created power, but standing in that humble diner, surrounded by chipped plates and worn booths, he understood something greater. Compassion creates peace, and peace had been missing from his success for a very long time. He glanced once more at her son, a child absorbing every interaction, learning what strength looks like, learning how dignity behaves under pressure, and he silently hoped that today's lesson would be different from the one he almost taught. "I'm sorry," he said again, this time not as a wealthy man apologizing downward, but as a human apologizing honestly. She nodded, and in that nod was acceptance, not submission, not admiration, simply acknowledgement. The kind two equals share. He turned to leave once more, but this exit felt different. The bell above the door rang again as he stepped outside. The sunlight hadn't changed. The parking lot was the same. His luxury car still gleamed, but something inside him was no longer hollow. For the first time in years, his chest felt lighter, not powerful, peaceful. Inside the diner, she held her son close for a brief second before returning to work. The shift wasn't over. The responsibilities hadn't disappeared. Life would still demand strength tomorrow, but something had shifted, not in her dignity that had never been broken, but in the world around her. The manager approached quietly. "You handled that well," he muttered. She simply nodded, because dignity does not celebrate itself. It just stands. She folded the handwritten note carefully and placed it inside her apron pocket, not as proof of charity, but as proof of recognition. Her son returned to his drawings, though this time his small smile carried something new: hope. And across town, as the millionaire drove away, he didn't feel taller. He felt humbled. He had entered the diner believing he was the one who would measure character. Instead, he had been measured and found lacking, until he chose to change. The bold zero he wrote that afternoon would remain in his memory far longer than any business deal he had signed, because that zero had revealed an emptiness he didn't know he carried. And that small diner, with its cracked tiles and tired ceiling fan, had given him something no boardroom ever could: perspective. In the end, the lesson was simple. Money can test others, but humility tests you. And true wealth is not counted in bills, cars, or influence. It is measured in compassion. That afternoon, in a small-town diner, a single mother protected her dignity, a child witnessed strength, and a wealthy man rediscovered his humanity. And sometimes, that is worth more than any fortune. True wealth is not measured by what you give when you have abundance. It is measured by how you treat others when you hold power. Dignity does not beg. Compassion does not boast. And sometimes, the smallest act of humility can restore what success has erased. Money can test someone's patience, but character reveals someone's soul. If this story moved you, remember, someone's silent strength may be stronger than your loud success. Subscribe now for more emotional stories about dignity, redemption, and the true meaning of wealth.